In this video, I'm going to talk about different identifiers available in Microsoft Copilot Studio. Now, when you browse through the Copilot Studio interface, you will find a lot of different IDs scattered within the application. Sometimes these IDs are in like an authoring interface, sometimes they are in the entire Copilot Studio interface, sometimes they are within the application, and sometimes you will find these identifiers when you publish the application. Now, what are these IDs? Now, these IDs are useful when you want to view your application, your the solution boundary. If you want to understand where this application is hosted from an environment perspective or from a tenant perspective, and what is the current session through which this application is currently running. Now, this identifier will help you when you want to integrate your Copilot Studio with some other applications, or maybe if you want to extend your Copilot into some different systems, or if you want to provide some extensibility to Microsoft 365 Copilot. Now, there are different IDs which are currently available, named as Session ID, Tenant ID, Object ID, Environment ID, Copilot ID, Organization ID, Copilot App ID. Now, all these IDs have a different purpose. Now, session ID is basically will give you, the identifier of the currently running session. So if a user is logged into the authoring interface, now if the user is performing any action, then the user is currently logged into some session, and that will be the session identifier. Now, most of the time this will be different. You will not find the session ID to be same. Say if you are accessing the session, or if I'm accessing the session, then it will be completely different. Now, tenant ID. Now, tenant ID is the at a top level. It's basically the tenant, uh, the housing interface, which host all your different applications, like your Power Platform based application like Power Apps, Power Automate, and then there are other applications. This is basically a high level housing interface which will store the identifier, and this identifier you will use to basically create an app registration, or if you want to integrate different sort of APIs like a graph API, then this particular ID will be useful. Object ID is basically the current object which you are referring. This is the identifier of that. Environment ID is again, the concept is in Power Platform you have different environments. Now, within environments you will have, it's basically, I would say, a container which contains various applications. You can build various applications like Canvas apps, model driven apps, and even a Copilot from Copilot Studio application as well. Now, every Copilot you create will have its own Copilot ID, and the app which will be utilized to publish the application of Copilot into different system, then you will make use of Copilot App ID. Organization ID is again coming from the Dynamics 365 concept, whereby it's basically a database instance of where all the solutions are currently hosted for your specific database or your specific environment, or it's basically, I would say, a database instance ID from a hardware perspective. Now, the next slide, if you see, like, if you are actually provisioning a Copilot, so in this case I have already created one Copilot, and if I navigate to the Copilot details, I should be able to see the environment ID, tenant ID, Copilot app ID, and the schema name. Now, schema name is also very important, because that will give you an indication that whether your solution is housed in a default solution or you're housing in your own custom solution. And this will be the schema name which will be used for various other development related operations in the near future as well. Now, when you add a skill, there you will find a Copilot ID. So if you want to find out what is the Copilot ID, then if you add a skill, then that in that interface you will find the Copilot ID as well. Now, when you publish your application to a channel, now in this case the channel is Microsoft Teams. Now, when you integrate your application with Microsoft Teams, then quite possible you may utilize Azure app registrations to publish your Copilot to a different channel. Now, this app ID which you see over here is that one. Okay, so this will act as a bridge between your application or your Copilot with the different channel. Like in this case, it's Microsoft Teams. In the authoring interface, if you click on the clock icon, you will see session details. Now, session details, when you click on session details, a model pop-up will come up. It's not a model pop-up, it's like a window will pop up, and then it will give you various information about session details, Copilot Studio details, and Power Platform environment details. Now, this is segregated into three different sections like session, Copilot Studio, and Power Platform environment. Now, Power Platform environment will have org ID, unique name, instance URL, and Copilot Studio is specific to Copilot Studio. So, what is the authoring interface version? What is the platform version? What is the UX version? What is the solution version? So, all these things will be housed in Copilot Studio details. You'll find Copilot ID in Copilot Studio details. Now, other things like tenant ID, object ID, session ID, these are at very high level uh, uh, identifiers. Now, these all things are stored in the session details, user details sections. Now, after that, what we are going to do, we are going to extract the Copilot URL. We will extract the demo website URL and Teams app sharing link to basically dissect the URL and understand where all these IDs are usefully placed. So let's jump into the demo. Okay, so I'm in copilotstudio.microsoft.com, or if you want to access the preview feature, you can log into copilotstudio.preview.microsoft.com and make sure that you are in the right environment. So I'm in the right environment over here. And what I'm going to do first thing is, like, if I click on the settings, if I click on session details, then it will give me a a window which will show information about user details, Copilot Studio details, and Power Platform environment details. Now, these are very rich information which will help you while integrating this application with third-party systems, or if you're publishing this application to a channel, or if you're making use of app registration, or if you just want to understand how this application is currently structured or placed. So these are some of the things which are very important, like session ID, tenant ID, object ID, and from a Copilot Studio details perspective, environment ID, which environment does it belong to? So now in this case, this belongs to Girish Preview US environment, and that's why this is showing the environment ID of this particular environment. Now, tenant ID, the entire Microsoft 365 tenant is currently like provisioned. That acts as a backbone for this entire application of Copilot Studio or any other Power Platform application. So that basically refers to this tenant ID. Now, Power Platform environment details. Now, from a database instance perspective, we have an organization ID. So this is coming from the Dynamics 365 concept. So any environment which has a Dataverse or a database instance available, then you will find that organization ID over here. So every environment will have a separate organization ID as well as uh, a organization ID as well as an environment ID. Now, so this is one of the places where you will find different IDs. Now, there are other places where you can find the IDs as well. So if I go into, say, one of the Copilot which I have built, and if I navigate to the Copilot, and if I go into the settings area, so if I click on settings over here, then under skills, say if I want to add a skill, let's assume, then if I click on add a skill, then I should be able to see the Copilot uh, app ID as well, the Copilot ID. Okay, so if you see here, you can see the Copilot ID. So this is also one of the places whereby you can see Copilot ID. Now, where are the other places where you can see Copilot related identifiers is, say, if you want to publish your Copilot. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to publish this Copilot to a channel. Okay, so if I'm publishing this Copilot to, say, Microsoft Teams, okay, so what will happen is, like, I've already published this application to Microsoft Teams, so there are some set of configuration which you need to do. And if I click on edit details over here and under manage Copilot details, let me close this. Let me go back to again. So if I click on channels, if I go to Microsoft Teams, and if I click on to edit details, because I've already configured this Microsoft Teams over here, and if I click on more, then I should be able to see, if I scroll down a bit, I should be able to see the app ID. So this is the app ID. This is basically a bridging interface from your Copilot Studio application to Microsoft Teams application. Now, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna copy the URL. So if you see this Microsoft Teams application, now this Microsoft Teams application is, published. This Copilot is basically published to Microsoft Teams application, and I can directly open the Teams application from here. If I click on edit details, and if I click on more over here, and if I scroll down, you will see the application ID which I have just showed you. You can copy this application ID, and if we click on manage Copilot details, then here you should be able to see under advanced various other settings which we have already covered, like environment ID, tenant ID, Copilot app ID, and the schema name. So these are some of the important identifier which will help you in integrating with other applications. Okay, so now this particular application, now what I'm going to do is, like, first thing, I'll just copy this entire URL. Now this is the URL through which I have created this Copilot, okay, copilotstudio.preview.microsoft.com, and I've created a Copilot, and now I'm under the context of Girish Expense Claim Assistance Copilot, right? Now, if I copy this URL and if I paste it in a notepad, and if I try to parse this URL, I'll see some interesting things over here. So if you can see, so this is the Copilot Studio instance, okay, of one of the Copilot. Now here, if you want to refer to that Copilot, you will need to first specify the environment. So this URL will specify that this Copilot belongs to this environment, and this is the Copilot ID or the bot ID. Okay, so this is how you basically, so this is an instance of Copilot. Okay, so in order to identify the Copilot instance, you need to have an environment ID and the Copilot ID. Now, what we're going to do, we are going to go into the channel and we're going to go into the demo website. So demo website is basically a placeholder whereby you can publish your Copilot and you can test it. So it's a demo website. It's basically a website provided by Microsoft for you to test the Copilot. So I'm just going to copy this Copilot. So I'll show you how this demo website looks like. If I paste it in the browser, then it will open an interface, and from here you can test your bot. Now, if I paste that URL of demo website published, and if I try to dissect this information, so if you see, this is the stock standard URL. You need to have an environment and then the bot, and then there are other things. So if you watch this now, for a demo website, you need to have the environment ID, which we already have from the previous interface. And here it refers to the schema name of the bot. So now this is the schema name, which will be used while publishing to the demo website. So if you copy the URL, then you will see these two identifier related information. Now, in the first, when we authored using Copilot Studio, we found that environment ID and bot ID, or basically Copilot ID, is used. But in this case, it is utilizing the schema ID. Now, let me go into the Copilot over here.
So now what I'm going to do is, now
if I go into Microsoft Teams, now if you go into Microsoft Teams, you will see various options. Now I've published my bot to the demo website as well as to the Microsoft Teams
what I'm going to do,
website
I'll
as
click the button over here named as availability options. Okay, so if I click on availability options, then what happens is I will be able to copy the link of the Teams. Now if I click on copy link, then the Teams URL will be copied to my clipboard. Now again, I'll go into the notepad and I'll say Teams published ID. Now here, I will be dissecting the information. So this is the URL for the Teams to open and try to extract the app. So if I just parse the query string, then if you closely watch this URL, what it is doing is it is pointing to the environment ID. Now this environment ID is the same environment ID which is used in the instance of Copilot while we are authoring the Copilot, and also while this Copilot is being published to demo website as well. Also from an app perspective, now this app is basically an app registration which we did while publishing the Copilot to Teams application. Now, this is that I'd say an app ID. Okay, so this is different than the environment ID or tenant ID or the session ID. So, like this, if you, I have just given you three different examples, like the one where you provision the Copilot instance when you publish the Copilot to demo website and when you publish into Teams. Now, all in all these three different things, you are making use of one sort of different ID, but the only commonality is it is getting referenced environment ID, which is common across. Now, for demo website, it is using specifically the schema name. For instance of the Copilot, it is using the bot ID, and for Teams, when you publish into Teams, it is making use of app registration. So that's it, folks. This is all about making use of different identifiers while publishing or while interfacing your Copilot with different application, be it first party or be it third party application. Thanks for watching.